Oh, hello. Hello, gentlemen.
Hi, you hear me okay?
I can get my colleagues back into this Zoom
Okay.
meeting here. Callan's not gonna be with us, so I'm managing the account here for the first time. So we may get a few minutes start a few minutes late. How about you both? Oh, I see
Good.
5 participants now, actually. Oh, there's Karen. Welcome back, Karen.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Okay, let's get Shelley in here. Okay. Hi, Pam.
Hi there, good to see you guys. Let's see. There I am.
Ah, okay. That's a nice shade of yellow or tan.
It's called a Post-it note over the camera. Keep the Chinese out. Okay. Whoever's spying on us this month, but whatever.
Well, we'll give people a couple more minutes to chime in. I don't know. We had a rough idea of how many to expect, but you know how that goes with webinars. Sometimes folks come, sometimes they don't. Appreciate you all taking time to be here.
Great.
Pam, I know I've never met you, but I do have a copy of your lab manual on my shelf behind me. So
Wonderful, thank you. I hope it's good. We're revising them this summer.
oh, great.
I'm revising it and, working with the editor people. So if you have anything that you want different, let me know.
Well, I'm sure as we go through this whole process, we may have suggestions for you. Yeah.
Yeah, this will be great.
It'd be really cool to be able to, if somehow coordinate the two, that's an idea.
Yeah, that's true. That would be ideal. So I've got several labs I'm trying to add to it. So we'll see if they let me increase the number of pages or have to take some internet-based labs out that half the links are dead on or whatever. So,
Cool.
yeah. Those
All right.
comments from anybody. That'd be great. Thanks.
Well, it's 12:05. In the interest of being considerate with everybody's time, I think we'll go ahead and get started, unless Karen and Shelley, unless you have any particular. Okay. All right. So welcome. Thank you for taking time to be with us this midday in May to talk about our project. There's a group of 4 of us. Myself, I'm at Lord Fairfax Community College in Virginia. Callan Bentley, I think all of you probably know Callan because I don't know all of you, but you probably have some connection with him. You know, he's at Northern Virginia Community College. He can't be with us today because of a family emergency that occurred yesterday. So my other colleagues here are Karen Liu from Sergeant Reynolds here in Virginia, and then Shelley J., who is in Washington but teaches through Northern Virginia Community College. And I've got that correct, right, ladies?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yep, you're right.
So we've taken on the task of creating an OER, Open Educational Resource textbook for historical geology specifically, noting that there are a couple of physical geology texts out there that are online that we've looked at. Some of us have used, noting that there seems to be a gap for historical, and at least in the VCCS system, the Virginia Community College system, physical and historical geology are 2 classes that are the sort of basic sequential geology courses that students take. And so we wanted to design an introductory level text that was kind of inspired by what they call themselves SLCC, or Salt Lake Community College Physical Geology text from opengeology.org. And so we kind of vision it as being similar to that, interactive, but even more interactive. So we want it to be introductory level. We want it to be accessible to non-science majors as well as science majors. And we want it to be, yes, in other words, applicable to gen ed majors as well. So the bottom line is we want to inspire students to be excited about geology and excited about the history of the Earth in a way that sometimes is difficult to get across with traditional textbooks. So I guess in this regard, the structure of the webinar, Karen, do you want to discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, basically, we kind of had two broad areas we wanted to get your feedback on. One is general content, because we're still in the process of fully fleshing out our table of contents in particular sections. And then we also wanted to get some feedback in terms of the format. So what we'd like to do is maybe spend the first 15, 20 minutes or so talking about the content side of it, and then the next 15, 20 minutes talking about the format. Because ultimately what we want to do is make something that's going to be useful and adoptable to as many folks as possible.
So I should mention that this work we're doing is funded by a grant from the Library of Virginia. It's a course redevelopment grant. They've generously funded us through spring of next year. So we'll see if we can manage this by spring. That's our goal, to have it testable in classrooms by that rather quick date, or rather soon date. So to begin the discussion of content, all of you have weighed in, or I assume all of you have weighed in using the form that we sent out a while back. One result of that was that 54% of respondents noted that paleontologically related topics are areas they feel most uncomfortable teaching. So within the area of paleontology specifically, or the biota, paleobiota in general, what are some areas that are worth focusing on from your perspectives that aren't necessarily, or that are difficult? That maybe Jason, Matthew, Pam, maybe you guys are all like hardcore paleo folks. I don't know, but
I'm a paleontologist, so
okay.
I feel most comfortable teaching.
Okay.
I think I put like structure and general regional history or something in there, because formation names and stuff always disappear, whereas genera I have no problem remembering.
Okay.
But I think that's valuable, Jason, because I'm a paleo person and so is Russ.
Mm-hmm.
And we have that sense of like, we can tell all kinds of stories, but there's that key of what would you say are kind of your top 5 big paleo related topics that really need to be covered in a historical text?
Okay.
And I know it's a loaded question.
Mass extinctions with a tie-in to climate change. I'm a mass extinction researcher, so it's becoming more and more evident that at very least 4 and probably all of the big 5 events were climate events. So there's a chance to get into anthropogenic stuff in that as well there. The relationship between the evolution of the spheres, right? So in particular, the relationship between the origin of life and the change in atmosphere, and the feedback relationships with surface weathering, with mineral evolution, with all of those sorts of, physical geological processes that you don't think of it having a biological component to, but which do. And then I suppose the rise of the main groups. So the kind of eukaryotic origin, the Ediacaran radiation through to the Cambrian stuff, and then I usually I spend most of my time on that, and then I do a crash course kind of period by period. And by that point, I've got a few weeks left, so I'm really doing almost a class per in the Carboniferous this happened. But those are also big picture things of, the relationship between the origin of trees and changes in atmospheric composition and changes in weathering rates and all those sorts of. So again, the interaction between biotic events and the rest of the sphere.
So when that information is presented, do you find it useful to kind of say, here's the biological timeline, here's the lithological atmospheric timeline, and then put them together, or do you try to interweave it the whole through?
I kind of inherited a design for a course, and it's maybe not the best design, but we sort of combine historical and physical geography together into a class. And I justify that by doing the present is the key to the past, and therefore we're going to spend a third of the course looking at present processes. But in reality, it's because we have two principal geology classes, and we don't really have time to do surface processes, modern processes. By the time we always lose that when we do physical geography or geology. And so we end up spending the first kind of third of the class looking at modern processes. And then from there, I jump way back in time and do the origin of the planet, and then the origin of life, a couple classes on systematics and evolution. And now I just lost the stream of the question. What actually was the question?
Well, whether you weave the system interactions together, Karen, is that, or whether you take them from starting?
Yeah. So okay. So because I've already spent a third of the class kind of looking at physical processes, and then I bring life in after the fact, it's kind of a natural combination, right? Where we've already looked at surface processes, and then we look at how those have changed over time. So we look at the evolution of the Earth as a system, having already looked at general processes. But that's, again, maybe an unnatural way of teaching it. It's just kind of how I inherited the course. It works well enough.
Okay.
So I'm a paleontologist also, but I was one of those people that wrote that I was least comfortable teaching paleontology in historical. And so I don't know, you asked about the top five, Karen. I'm not sure what I would put in the top five, but the reason why it makes me uncomfortable is that most of the students that are entering have had physical geology, right? But they don't have the biology background necessarily. And paleo, as you know, right, is an integration of those two fields. But by the time I could catch them up to speed on the biological side, like that's a whole course, really. You know, they in order to do it well, they need to have intro bio, and most of them have not had intro bio. And a lot of times intro bio is cell and molecular and not ecological or evolutionary. And so they haven't even really gotten to the kind of background stuff that they would need in order to truly understand what's going on in the paleo side. The second reason is that a lot of them come in with information about paleo because it's like dinosaurs and volcanoes is like what's hooking people initially.
Yeah.
And as geologists, we know that like actually dinosaurs and volcanoes, like they're interesting, but that's not really representative of the scope of what geology is. So they kind of come in with more, I think, prior misconceptions about paleo than they do about hydrology, which they probably never have thought about, or stratigraphy or whatever it might be. The third thing is that, like, in order to be able to do, this is my opinion here, in order to be able to do interesting things about paleontology, you have to get through a lot of boring stuff first, like taxonomy. Now, taxonomy is important, but it's also boring to learn it, I think, unless you're like super invested in a particular group. To do the big survey stuff, like they call it, the parade of taxa, the march of taxa. You almost have to do that for any of the other stuff later on to make sense. And so there's just a lot of trust required for the student to be able to say, if I slog through this, then I'm going to be able to understand what it means, what mass extinction means, or all these things that are really just taxonomic patterns. But unless they know what a crinoid is and how it works, they're not really going to get that.
Right. Right. I think you raise good points here about this idea of you have to cover biologic topics.
Yeah.
And so when I'm thinking about kind of like top 5 categories, it's like, yes, there's the mass extinction part, but then there's also the kind of the basics of cladistics, make a cladogram, the basics of some of it, just thinking about ecology, like why filter feeding is a super important ecological mechanism through time. And so this is where, again, as a paleontologist, because I know so much, I feel very challenged to constrain it to just the most important information because I see and know all of the big connections.
Right.
Well,
we've already gone through biological species. I mean, we know what a species is. When somebody says population, we understand what a population size is. Most of my students are not coming in with that general background. They probably had biology in 9th or 10th grade.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. I noticed we were doing some writing exercises, and I wrote a section on paleoecology. And I started that whole section with a big chunk of just basic ecology as we see it today, and how do we transfer this knowledge to interpret the past through this lens. But I'm primarily a high school teacher, so I just sort of moonlight as an adjunct. So, but when I think about it, yeah, that's probably the last time. So what I was trying to do was harness what they might have learned in 9th or 10th grade.
Yeah.
But that's a lot to rely on. We have to trust that they actually learned something. So I guess if would it be valuable, of any value, to include some of that basic material in a book like this, as an aside, as a box, as a part of the main? Because we were debating this.
Yeah, I mean, I would be an advocate of doing that. Certainly, I think to do it in a just-in-time kind of style, rather than, students who already have it can move past it, and students who don't can access it. It's there, as a sidebar or whatever it might be. But then not to disrupt that that this is foundational material. This is not the main stuff.
Okay, that makes sense, because we kept it, but we're like, do we put this in a box, like you can link to it to another part of the book, perhaps? Okay, that's very helpful.
I would actually maybe disagree with that, in that I think it is foundational material, but maybe that's how I do the course. If we're talking about things like systematics and that, so I don't have a trouble getting bogged down in taxonomy, because I really don't spend a lot of time on specific groups, both because the students aren't going to memorize and we don't have enough time, but also because it's not a paleontology course. I do more of an Earth systems kind of approach, and so, for example, when I'll talk about the sponges showing up and how they interact with the ocean environment in terms of cleaning things up and therefore potentially boosting oxygen levels. I talk about the main Ediacaria fauna just because they're enigmatic, and so we talk about difficulties with taxonomy of them and that, but it's mostly tied into, again, the evolution of these complex animal communities, where they occur. How we can see, the feedback of muscularization in terms of substrate revolution stuff, in terms of competition and arms race things. So I have specific classes and lectures on, say, cladistics, on the origins of taxonomy, on speciation, on the problems with different definitions of species. So all of that stuff I spend more time on than I do on memorizing this group. I want them to memorize a few things, but they're just placeholders. There could be, I make them memorize a few of the coal fossil forest plants because I live in Cape Breton. It's coal land. I want them to pick up a fossil. But I'm more interested with them understanding how, say, the coevolution of plants and vertebrates occurred, and why we get terrestrial organisms showing up at the same time, more or less, as the first forests. Right? I'm more interested in that part of the story. So the broader kind of theoretical stuff would be more useful to me.
Well, that brings us to one idea that came up in another meeting we had, where we talked about table of contents with other colleagues, and that was, teaching the book with a kind of a thematic approach. Like one person said, you could just teach historical geology, kind of like what you said, Jason, with just teaching it through the lens of climate change. So here, teaching it through the lens of Earth systems interactions would be a really interesting potential theme. Is that kind of what you're getting at, I guess?
Yeah, that's how I teach it. One of the things I would note is that if you're making a textbook, as much as possible, if it could be designed so that local examples could be inserted into when other people outside of your region adopt it, so that if the general structure there tells a story of the evolution of North America, as well as these big picture things of big picture ideas like ecological engineering, right? Or systematics that exists, or evolution, right? These kinds of ideas, geochemistry, that we can do it. We can understand. There are ways we can how we understand past environments, all those sorts of things. But then where we can plug and play local examples as much as possible with relatively little effort, so that it can be a Cape Breton book, or it can be a wherever Matthew is book. Where are you, by the way?
Matthew, where are you?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Oh.
No, it's pretty
Okay.
similar to us, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same rocks as us in Virginia, largely.
Yeah.
So
Pam, did you have anything to add?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were talking about integrating different things, and I wanted to let you all know that I take an approach where we sort of start with plate tectonics, and that's going to influence where the continents are. So where the continents are, then it's going to influence the climate. Is it on the pole? Then you can have glaciation or not. Is it on the equator? It's often a supercontinent. But anyway, then the climate is going to influence the sea level. Are we going to have a transgression or regression? Is North America flooded? And then the sea level is going to influence the habitats you get. And if you've got a lot of shallow marine habitats, then you're going to have an increase in diversification of the corals in the Paleozoic, for instance, when North America was flooded. So the habitats influence the life, and then the life is going to end up influencing the atmosphere. Is it going to be producing oxygen? Is it going to be, doing what? And then the atmosphere is going to influence the sea level, and then you sort of end up with cycles and everything's interacting. But I want them to see that one thing affects another thing, so that it's all a big system, and if you change something and upset the climate, whatever, that impacts everything else down the line. And I also am realizing from talking to my students, there are a couple of things that they don't get. One person this semester thought extinction just meant something dies. They didn't know the difference between all of them dying off and an individual. And I'm thinking, didn't you get that in third grade or something? But no. So the part about them not having a biological background is worse than we thought, I guess.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from you, and essentially from everybody, is this idea that we really need to focus on this idea of how it's all interrelated, how everything's connected. That's
Right.
the message of historical geology for most folks.
I agree with my colleagues about the interactions.
Yeah.
Certainly that's, I think, the direction that geology is going in anyway.
Right.
But also there's a lot of textbooks already on the market now that they adopt an encyclopedic approach where they're treating them all separately. And, they're not free, but I think that there's an opportunity to be something more than just a free version of what's already out there. And it seems to me like the interactions between different systems is the right call. Now, Stanley already has a textbook that does that. Earth System History ostensibly is trying to do that. Whether you think it's successful or not depends on the reader, but that's the approach he's taking.
So I think one of the challenges is that when you're trying to write an introductory level textbook that integrates as much as we hope for, it's a challenge because, again, students don't necessarily have the correct background. Process all aspects simultaneously. Yeah. And I think that's why we get the sort of structure. What would you think about doing a case study approach where, let's say, you would focus on just, say, Snowball Earth or the PETM as examples of times when we can see very detailed intersections and interactions between spheres?
Yeah, I love the idea of case studies. That's typically how I do it in class. Also, I think in general, trading breadth for depth is always a good choice. To your first point, Penn State, which is right up the road from me, teaches historical geology as an upper level class. Their geology majors are taking it really as seniors because of the interactive approach. And so I think probably they're right. Nobody else does it like that, but they're probably right that in the sense that you're bringing all these strands together, that it deserves to be at that level where they can start putting those pieces together. And so I think that that block is inherent to where we collectively as a discipline have decided to teach historical geology. It's probably in the wrong place. But given that we're not gonna change all that stuff now, we're sort of stuck with it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, we noted that in the survey that most people don't like the march through time approach, which I think we've noticed a lot in textbooks. So we definitely don't want to take that approach. Well, we've talked about teaching big moments, case studies, and I think you guys are echoing that. So
yeah, I mean, the way that Juniata works, by the time our students graduate, so these are geology majors, and I understand you're not shooting just for geology majors. But I've probably had them for five or six different classes as individuals, right? And so, so I've seen what they carry over from one class to another. It's never what you think it is. It's never as much what you think it is or what you hope it's going to be.
yeah,
And so what I found, I think what really matters the most is, are you able to fire them up enough to carry them over to the next level, and the next level, and the next level, and then they acquire the breadth by hopping from lily pad to lily pad. And so for me, teaching historical, or really anything, I don't actually think it's super important for you to cover all of like the important topics. The semester is typically like 15 weeks, find like the 15 most amazing things you could possibly say about Earth history and hit those things hard each for a week. And then if they don't spend as much time on the Cenomanian Turonian or something like that, like who cares, because they spent a lot of time on the PETM, which has implications for modern day warming, and that's the base for later. That's risk. I mean,
yeah,
it's a risk when you're writing the textbook.
yeah. Well, are we at a place where we should transition to format then? I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. We are. Our first thought was to get your impressions on how you would best use a text, or how would you expect or want to use a text in your course. Do you assign readings? Do you just use it as a reference? Do you expect students to use it, interact with it before class, after class? Do you use interactives within it? Would you like to see interactives in a text? Because we're planning on doing that. So just going to get your sound out your feelings on those things. How would you use this for a text?
Maybe we could ask, what do you use now for your classes? What textbook, or are you all open resources that you pull in yourself? What do you use now?
They don't require a textbook because of the cost issue, but I put copies in the classroom and I assign readings from those copies. They're available on reserve in the library too. So
Reserve, okay.
Okay.
Class size is not so huge. For me, it's different. It's not 100 people in my class. Class size is such that they're not all reading it at the same time. And so it's not an issue with needing to have multiple copies.
Okay.
Okay. Do you teach anything online, Matthew?
I teach one course online, global climate change.
Oh, okay. Okay. But not historical? No. Okay.
I think it could be done.
Yeah. I'm working on that.
Yeah,
Oh, good.
as am I. I've got a 10-week summer course here entirely online. It's going to be interesting.
How about you, Jason? What do you use?
I don't use a textbook because both of a cost issue and also because there's none that I found that I particularly like. I have a couple of required readings. So the first is that I integrate as much as possible historical stuff. I actually come from a background originally in history and philosophy of science before I switched into my PhD. And so I try to contextualize things historically. And so we read most of Brian Swiddick's Written in Stone, and I have them write personal reflections as we move through the course on that. I also have a series of other, that's $20. It's a pop science book. It's getting a little bit out of date, but it's still very good. I use as a recommended source. There's a book that's actually everybody. If you don't already have a copy, I really recommend you get a copy. It's called 4 Billion Years and Counting, and it's a book that was just put out. It's a coffee table style, really up to date, high science book, but very very accessible. That was put out by I don't know, the Earth Science Federation of Canada. I forget what their acronym, what their actual name is. But why I recommend this is because they produced literally like 1,000 new illustrations. Beautiful. But they've made all of the illustrations available Creative Commons licensed online.
Oh,
So
wow.
if you just Google 4 Billion Years and Counting, they're even already formatted chapter by chapter into PowerPoints you can download and just plug and play. And they're gorgeous. Like there's a diagram, for example, that shows all of the major components, at least within the Canadian kind of context. It's a Canadian book, right? All the major terrain and how they're migrating and moving forwards and moving apart. Just fantastic stuff. Anyways, highly recommend just to put it anyway. I already told Kellen that he should grab it and you guys should grab it and throw a bunch of these into your textbook because they're ready, they're done, they're good to go, and they're free to use. So I do that. I do some just general readings, but those two books, one is recommended, the other is required. But I also have a deal with the library where the Written in Stone, we have a digital copy they can read online for free if they choose to. One comment I would make about format is that it is important to me, and I think to students, that the book be printable. So not only is all the literature I'm aware of show a strong student preference for printing, but I'm actually doing some research on my own right now with some trial runs I've been doing of open textbooks. And so I just got the data back. I can show you graphs if you want from the last class. And more than half the students, even though most of them are international students and really tight on money, more than half the students said they would prefer to buy a print copy, and they would be happy to spend upwards of about $50 for a print copy for that convenience. And in one of the classes I just ran, I utilized a physical geology textbook, and half of the class chose a print copy that I got to them for about $35. And it was about a quarter up front, and then as the semester went on, another quarter started approaching me and saying, "Do you still have any print copies?"
Yeah. Well, I it's not just my age then. I certainly prefer a print copy myself, but I think having a print copy is something that that Viva wants us, the Library of Virginia wants us to have available, if I'm not mistaken. We're talking about that. So that's certainly important to us, I think, on some level. Obviously, we can't include 3D models and things like that in a print copy. So there are limitations.
Certainly, Callan knows about, he spent a lot of time thinking about visualizations.
Yeah.
I think actually when I heard about this, that was what I was most excited about. I think about like Marshak's Earth textbook. He was, I think, almost pioneering in terms of including animations and things like that. I don't think any historical textbook has received a similar kind of treatment. You can have a good textbook or a bad textbook, and it can be used well or poorly. And so it's not the textbook that I think necessarily drives the educational experience, because you can have a great textbook and if a professor comes in, they just lecture all day with PowerPoint slides of amazing visuals from a textbook, it's still bad teaching. And you can have a terrible textbook that's used well, right? And so I think, I'm not sure how you would do this, but anything that incentivizes or nudges the instructor towards using it in a different way than coming in and PowerPoint lecturing about the material is welcome, I think, to the discipline. You're going to end up producing, better geoscientists, and you're going to end up producing better citizens who know something about earth science when they go about whatever they're going to do that's not geology. I'm not sure how you do that, but.
Well, I mean, one idea we talked about yesterday was try to work in various skills, observation skills, especially with the interactives. Little self-test questions are one thing, but like, here's a gigapan, interpret this through this lens. Now think of it this way. Karen, Shelley, does that kind of, you want to elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because fundamentally, I think what you're saying, Matt, is really key. This idea that you want to incorporate as much active learning as you can, using this as a resource and tool to facilitate that. And so I think the question is, most instructors, I think, see a textbook as this thing that students are using to the classroom. So there's that piece of, again, how do you make it easy enough for faculty to perhaps change up the way they're approaching their curriculum to encourage more use of a text in class. So something to think about.
Certainly, like the GigaPan interpretation, I think, is a great one.
Right. And so the idea of having those as supplementals throughout the text, or perhaps in a section at the end where we could have them that are emphasizing different points. And I think one of the things that was most powerful in my own undergrad experience was going back to the same outcrop in different classes.
Yeah.
So, like, you'd go for SED, and then you go back for structure, and then you go back for paleo, and you're looking at the same rocks, but you're getting different contexts every time. And that might be a way to kind of layer GigaPan interactions.
I guess part of it comes down to, again, and this was the opening question of how the textbooks are to be used. So I know that a lot of students, in particular, I have a lot of international students, and they like to have a textbook or other resources. So it's one of the things I was just asking them is, what are you using for resources? And they're all desperately searching YouTube. They're searching the internet because they often struggle to keep up in classes, either for language issues or because they lack background information coming in. And so they want something that they can read to go over those fundamental concepts. I often want them to read something in advance so they can come in so that I can then do interactive things with them. And so if the goal is a supporting clarification, module that they can go through, then the standard kind of print textbook, but one that is strategic in terms of what it emphasizes, that could be useful. And it's not something then that would support necessarily just you reading it out as part of the lecture, which is the worst way you could possibly lecture. And that could be integrated with something where you have online exercises, lecture tutorials type things you could do at home or in class, or labs, virtual labs, these sorts of things. Those don't have to necessarily be the same document. They can be separate things. So I know, for example, the University of Saskatchewan has just taken the BC's version of physical geology, redone it, put it out as mostly an online version, but it's still just a textbook. But they're also doing an open lab manual at the same time, which hasn't been released yet. Alternatively, you could do the other one. I forget, is it opengeology.org or what's
That's our inspiration.
Yeah, so I've just played with that a little bit, but that one seems to be a lot more, the idea is you're actually doing it and it's an active learning thing. You're answering questions as you go along. And it's just, those are very, very different documents. For my personal, for how I approach things and how I think my students are used to doing things, they would probably rather have a free version of a traditional textbook. And I think I'd get pushback if I gave them a weird thing. Now, they may actually try it if I force them to do it and love it and recognize this is way better, this interactive learning thing. But I think I would get pushback initially because students aren't used to learning like that.
It's a risk. There are lecture tutorials for introductory geoscience, the Karen Kortz and
I use those and they're great.
Yeah, they are excellent, and there is a few of the sections that overlap with historical geology, but that's, of course, that's not really what it's aimed for. So I do use those, and like them very much. And if there was a historical geology version of that, sort of like what Jason says, maybe not as the bulk of the textbook. I agree. There's some capacity building in both the professorship as well as the student body about what a course is supposed to be, what the best educational means is. But if it's in there as an appendix or something like that, of course, I'm making work for you. I don't know if that's going to be possible by spring, but I do echo that comment that the lecture tutorials have been really good, and it would be nice to see some that are historical geology focused. In addition to the ones that are already there.
What were the ones that, who created those again?
Quartz and Snag,
Course.
Karen Quartz.
Okay, you're familiar.
And
I haven't heard of them, so
yeah,
Yeah,
they're
I'm lost,
fantastic.
apparently.
That's another tip. If you go on, so who makes them? Freeman makes them officially, but it's actually Macmillan. If you go online through their lab partner thing, you can actually just pick all the ones you want, and they're quite cheap, and then put them into a thing, and then they send you this, which is a custom book that I just made myself. And it ended up showing up just all the ones I wanted, and I could get it to students with shipping for, I think, under $25, which was actually cheaper than the real version, except I got to pick the ones I wanted. The students seemed to like it. I did them in class, and then I had a bunch of extra ones in there, and then I gave them multiple ways of being evaluated. And one of the ways it could be evaluated is if they completed the entirety of this on their own, then I think 10% of their mark would be from this. Alternatively, if they didn't want to do the work, they could just take that 10% and throw it onto their final exams. So it's a way of helping out the students who need a little extra help.
How big are your classes, Jason?
It depends. That one was quite small. In theory, it was supposed to be about 20, but there was about 12 in it. But I do also do like my petroleum classes can be 100 or 60. I had 3 sections of 60 for one of them. The labs are theoretically capped at 15, but they never are. They're always a little over 20.
Okay.
Well, when you think of interactives in a textbook, specifically, what comes to mind? We mentioned GigaPan images. We all know Callan, of course, and some of the stuff he's done. But what when you think about interactives, what would come to mind that might be useful?
Have you all seen those 3D models
Yeah.
where you can take a picture of a fossil and it sort of rotates around? And I don't know how they take all the pictures and make it smoothly work, but we're trying to get our fossils and specimens that we use for display imaged like that. We've got some people at the university that are doing it for us, but that's kind of useful to have, especially for the online students who don't have a gastropod to turn around in their hands and see what it looks like on all sides.
Yeah, Sketchfab has a large library of those things people have created. A lot of geoscientists, including Callan, and I've made use of them quite extensively. And they're not. I mean, as long as you have the software and the camera, they're not terribly difficult to make those yourself. But you do have to figure out how to do it. It's not.
And we do have some support on the grant to produce some of those types of images.
Yeah.
That was our intention. And so we can do that certainly with as well as fossils.
Well, and that would be another question. I'd be going back to content, I guess. Yeah, if there were specific things that people would love to have examples of. I know Callan's got quite the extensive library of both 3D models and GigaPans, and he can do the Giga macro imaging and so forth. In fact, our grant has written in support for creation of those, as Karen has said. So if there are specific things that you all would like to see in this kind of a book, like I can't find a good example of a particular specimen that you'd like to see as an interactive, those would be good to suggest to us. We'll try to see if we can accommodate that in some way.
Paleogeography. There's a lot of paleogeography animations, but they're passive because you just watch it. There was one that you could manipulate it yourself. That would be great.
You guys use the PBDB at all? Paleobiodiversity Database?
I'm well aware of it. Yeah.
Yep, I've used it.
Yeah, so for paleogeography, because you can go in any of the time periods when you flip on it, you can flip into either modern view or a paleo view, which puts all the continents in position. So you can do really neat paleobiogeographic stuff with that as well. I've got a couple labs that do like that.
What's that called again? I hadn't heard of that.
The Paleobiodiversity Database. It's actually it's a research database, but it's the web portal to it is very accessible, and so you can easily have undergraduates use it.
Yep.
You can also download all the data if you want to do advanced statistics and stuff.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Other thoughts on interactives? Might be useful. Types of interactives?
Just a warning that it's, I'm sure you're well aware of this, but if not, it's worth looking at the data that's available in terms of how students are using the digital ones, because I think a lot of them are going to be using their phones.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Hey, well, it's based on that, piggybacking off of that, do you know of any of them that are actually putting their phones in VR goggles to look at these things? Because
I'm doing it this year. So
you?
that's one of the things I was going to say. So two things. One, I just got a grant to produce to do both 3D scans of local specimens, to create a database, a regional database of local specimens. Because I know there's lots of great stuff on Sketchfab and that, as well as a drone to do, and 360 cameras to do 360-degree and also 3D reconstructions of sites. So that actually, for Pennsylvania, that might be useful. It's going to be Cape Breton, Nova Scotia focus, but some of that extends down.
Cool.
One thing would be time visualizations regarding geologic time. It underpins everything, and most students are not coming in with an understanding of either temporal or spatial scales, frankly. And I think the research shows that you really only acquire that by actually having a lot of content knowledge, unfortunately, because that's how you sort of, human brains estimate lengths of times based on how many points you experience in between those. So I'm not sure a way around that, but in the sense that's one of the foundational structures of understanding everything else. It would be nice, a really good visualization about time and spatial scales, quite frankly, would be really good.
Well, there's there's ChronoZoom, which I don't know if you're familiar with or not, but I mean that's the only one. That's the best one I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's good.
But yeah, I hear you. It doesn't necessarily have enough points in between. Maybe there's something to that.
Yeah.
Do each of you teach your historical courses as a separate lecture and a lab, or are they integrated?
Done it both ways. I went back to lecture and lab after combining for a long time. It's still combined, I would say, because it's designated as lecture. I very rarely lecture. But lab gave me, it's terrible, but it gave me an opportunity to see them for 4 hours for them only having to fit 1 credit into their schedule. When I combined them, I lost students because they couldn't fit it all. The credit hours tied to seat hours couldn't fit it in.
I've been lucky enough that my historical classes have been very small thus far, and also I've done both the lecture and the lab, and so that they're theoretically standalone things with standalone times, but I flip back and forth. So, for example, I do 2-stage testing for all my midterms and that, and I use my lab time for that, so I can have a 3-hour block to do a double test. But also, I'll just get up in the morning, and often the lectures are an ungodly time. They're at 8:30, and everyone's half asleep. And if I can tell everyone's half asleep, then we'll just go, you know what, let's do a practical activity. So even though they assign me to classrooms for the lectures, I always just move all the students and do both of them in the lab space. But I have the flexibility to be able to do that, and then I can go back and forth as necessary.
Right. Yeah, these are not separate courses for me, even though they have different times. Everybody that is in one is in the other. One syllabus. It's not 2 syllabi or, nothing like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've always been mystified how they set it up in our course management system at Lord Fairfax. There's always a lab section and a lecture section, and I never used the lab section. I just used the one. I've actually, it's interesting to hear it from you guys because I do the same sort of thing. I combine the two most of the time. So
I think lecture lab division it's archaic. I mean, at this point, but it's a legacy. It's going to be in there as a legacy.
Yeah.
Well, at our school, we do everything separate, and I might have students taking lecturer lab on another campus or taking lecturer lab online. So I don't see them for both. So we still have to be able to reach places like our school where there's no telling, you're not going to really have everybody.
Right.
Maybe somebody failed lab one time and they're repeating that. They're not in your lecture. so they don't have lecture at all this semester or vice versa.
Right.
So,
By the way, your cat looks very comfy back there.
oh yeah, there's two of them laying back there. One with the white on the tummy, and
Yeah.
then I get far enough back you can see one over here.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
Pam, are you saying that your students potentially have a different lecture instructor from their lab instructor?
Exactly.
Wow.
Right. Maybe
Yeah.
on a completely different campus.
So is there anything that could be done through the use of a text, or do you use a use of a text to help streamline, or is there a separate material that's used, like your lab manual then is used in lab and then the text is separate for lecture?
Well, let's see. Since we've got different campuses, well, we're all using the same lecture textbook, but we've got one campus using a different lab manual.
Wow.
So
Okay.
there's just no telling.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, this just the way this group of, on some level, it's, when we got the spreadsheet results from the survey we sent out for the webinars, we saw that people were all over the place with how they approached everything with this particular course. And it's interesting to see that reflected here in this discussion, even with the way they're structured at different schools. Well, great. So in the interest of time, I know we're coming down to the last 7 or so minutes. So does anybody have final thoughts before we wrap up here?
I have two things. One of the things that intrigued me about this initially was the data visualization piece. But the other one is that there are multiple authors on this. And there are a few textbooks that have 2 authors, but typically one person wrote it and then somebody joined in to start revising it. And they're essentially, synoptic treatments. And the idea that it's not crowdsourced necessarily, but it's certainly a much broader perspective than what any one person could provide was really exciting to me. I hope, it sounds like you will, but I hope you can capitalize on having a team of people. And then the other thing didn't come up in this conversation, but I think is really important in geosciences especially, is just to be part of that push towards equity. And, I think we're all trying to be more careful about what goes in our syllabi now, and making sure that it's not, just readings from predominantly white men all the time.
Yeah.
And that if you're going to use case studies, I guess I would encourage that those case studies be representative. Or if you're going to use an example here, an example there, to make sure that we're not going back to the same trough all the time.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, we've talked about diversity quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
I was concerned about facilitating this, actually, as the only guy in the group at the moment. Yeah. Which Karen and Shelley assured me was not a big problem for them. But all right, Jason, Pamela, any final thoughts?
I'll let Pamela speak.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad you all are working on this. I like to be able to teach the course online, and because I may have completely online sections, and we've got some samples in the library that we have them use for lab and things, but I like to be sure that they've got quizzes and things they can practice and do a little, maybe take a quiz on a unit, click the thing, and then it tell you, did you get them right or not? And I have them do that as many times as they need to sort of master a certain set of questions. And then I'll give them a related quiz afterwards, and it helps them to have been through some practice questions. It'd be nice to have some videos linked in, whether they're commercial things that are available online, or things that you all decide to make via video.
Mm-hmm.
Not just here's a gigapan of an outcrop, but could be somebody taking on a whole field trip, or one possibility. But things like the video, the students will actually watch, whereas they don't want to really read anything.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And and I also do some little interactive things. on paper. Like I've got some little fossil assemblages on little squares, and maybe there'll be one thing in the assemblage that's in another square, but they have to put the different squares in order through time. So they have to think about it and interact a little bit like that. I've got some little paper skeletons of, oh, I don't know, a pterodactyl or something. And each bone is a little separate piece of paper. And they cut them out and they have to reconstruct what kind of animal was this cute little thing while we have a skeleton. And then they talk about it and compare. And then I show them, well, it's really supposed to be this. And then there's some neat cladistics things I do from the, I guess it was the Florida Museum of Natural History. First of all, you do the cladistics of a penny versus a dime and a nickel and a quarter, and you go, okay, these are made of these metals or smooth edge or this or that. So they learn what to do. And then we have like animals, and they have to kind of arrange which of these are similar, which have 2-part symmetry, 5-part symmetry, and then they kind of place little pictures on a cladistics diagram. And then I can show them like, and here's the whole thing of life, and it's too big to even look at, but explain to them about the DNA part and how all that kind of, they're all familiar with the Who's My Daddy thing from Jerry Springer, and maybe the Who Are My Ancestors, and we can say, yeah, and you can take this farther, and here's how you related to, you know, a coral or a rhizoan or something. So
Yeah.
it's kind of fun.
Thank you. Jason?
I guess a couple of things. Just where is my? Can you guys see my screen? In theory, you can.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So these are the results of a survey I just gave to students who have not used an open textbook, and I asked them things. And so you can see I only had 27 students respond to the survey, but of them, so I mean, here's how many would you be more likely to read it? Who knows if they really would, but they claim that they would be way more likely to read it, right? But again, it was mostly international students, and I note a couple of things here. First, I asked them, would you be more likely to read it if there's more examples of Atlantic Canadian geology? And the vast majority said yes, and almost everyone said yes or maybe. And the other one is for international students, if would you be more likely to read it if there was examples from your own home country? And again, the majority said yes, they absolutely would. But so the ability to be able to modify it to put local content in some way would be very important to me. The other thing is Pamela made a comment about this, about videos and things. So I asked them, what are you doing other than reading the textbook? And geology websites, YouTube videos in particular, almost everybody is going to YouTube, Wikipedia, geology websites. This is where they're doing it. That said, almost everybody claims they would prefer to read a printed textbook. And so,
Interesting.
yeah, so I guess I'm wondering if maybe just blowing up the whole idea of a textbook and doing a combination of, you know, PDF style chapters that can be downloaded. I, as an instructor, can bundle, you know, and print off through my print shop like this if they want to have a physical document they can read, but also have a supported website that has both some new content that's produced, but also not reinventing the wheel, grabbing and integrating existing content. So, for example, I use the Evolution 101 stuff that the Berkeley the Paleontological Museum put out. Iris has got some fantastic stuff for doing earthquakes, seismic, stuff like that. There's no point in remaking any of that if you could just get permission to integrate that straight in. And so it could be a combination of a physical thing that you could print, or that you could access online, as well as a whole series of interactive things. Some of them created new, some of them borrowed from other places, in kind of a, you know, a website that hosts all of those materials together. Could be very useful.
Yeah, that's really valuable. Appreciate you giving us the insight into your survey.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
but-
Just I can send you the data if you want to. There was 100 students in the class, and unfortunately, I didn't get ethics permission until everyone had already gone away, and so I only got 27 respondents. But they confirmed all of my preconceptions, which is always good in a study. You want them to do that.
I'm just amazed at how many did not buy the textbook.
Yeah. So the thing to remember, I mean, they don't buy textbook in general. I don't think, even though it's required. But this was a class that has about 90% international students, and almost all of them. We've done this very strange thing at our university. We're a very small blue collar university, but we've just increased enrollment by 43% over the last year, which is insane. And almost all of them are within our Bachelor of Engineering Technology program, and almost all of them are from India. Like, we're actually Canada's most diverse university right now.
Wow.
We've gone to this thing where we are in probably the whitest province in the Confederation, and the whitest area of that. There are literally more international students at my little university right now, of about 4,000 students, than Statistics Canada says in the last census data have immigrated from anywhere in the world, including Europe, since the 80s. So there are more international people at the university right now than the totality of immigrants to Cape Breton Island over the last 30 years.
Well, you're on Cape Breton, and as a piper myself, there's great culture there. So what I hear.
I've got a big house. You guys are all welcome. That, by the way, is a legitimate offer. If you guys anyone wants to come out, I might put you to work doing a workshop or something. But there's a bedroom for you anytime you want.
Ooh,
Ooh, yeah.
sounds like something to think about.
Well, this has been very valuable. Thank you all for your time. And if you have any other ideas or thoughts that come to mind in the next little while, feel free to forward them along to Callan or any of us, include on the emails. And yeah, we'll be in touch with more information as it comes available.
Big quick question. How many of you guys go into NAPC? Any of you?
Not going this year.
No?
Mm-mm.
No one? All right. I was going to say see you there, but guess not.
Good luck with the writing and the production of this. It's a big task, but I'm excited that it's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're approaching it with care and trepidation and excitement. It's quite a mixture of feelings. So, yeah.
If you want to beta test content or whatever, I'm happy to send me things, and I'm happy to look at documents, help out any way I can.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that offer.
All right. Have a good day.
Thanks.
You too.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't get your name. It says Sage2YC.
Oh, yeah. My name Russ Kohrs. Russ Kohrs. Kohrs. Yeah. I noticed that like 10 minutes in. I was like, I never said my name. You know what?
Thank you. Good. Okay. Let you guys go then. Appreciate
All right.
you all doing this.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Pam. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good seeing you too, all of you. Okay. Take
All right,
care.
have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Karen, Shelley, you want to hang out for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Looks like we're still recording, which is good. It automatically started, which I was concerned about, but no concern. So, what do you?
Where does the recording go?
I would imagine to Sage 2IC account. I'm not sure entirely.
Yeah.
You probably have to log in as with the
Eric.
to get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
All right.
Well, that was really interesting. Very, very fruitful. And it's, it really sounds like Jason and Matthew were largely on the same page.
Yeah.
And Pam, yeah, she's got a
Strange situation.
yeah.
So the thing is, that's not unusual, because I know Thomas Nelson does the same thing where they have potentially different instructors for lecture and lab for their courses.
Yeah.
That happens here in the VCCS too.
Yeah, and I remember that was how it was at Tidewater, and I think that it's still that way at Tidewater. But with hers, as far as like you know, if you failed lab, you could take lab without lecture, and, you know,
Yeah.
So
that's a real challenge, I think, you know, to think about with what we're doing, you know.
right. And so it goes back to the question of, you know, who are we writing this text for? Who do we
Right.
adopt this text? And I think that we really do have to stay more general in the sense of we want to make something that's usable, but I think this idea of making it like where you can sort of puzzle in local relevance
Mhm.
is an interesting idea,
Yeah.
but I don't know how to do that.
Well, that's the thing. Is it puzzling it physically into the text, or is it just this is general enough that I can then work in my own examples? And that seems more realistic to me than us trying to like come up with.
Oh,
Yeah.
no,
Oh, yeah, right,
there's
exactly.
no way. Because again, it's just that whole, like, I think we even were talking a little bit talking about geologic time, you know, we focused on Laurentia, and then there's that tendency, like I've stripped down and I just cover like what is now the eastern side of the US. I really hardly cover Western tectonics at all, unless I really have to show a particular type of
Right.
orogeny or uplift or whatever. But yeah, so I think that what I found the most valuable to me was that idea of how to potentially encourage more active learning
Yeah.
strategies through the text.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes back to that piece of how are most people going to use a text in their class?
Hmm. I like the idea of using, one of them had the idea of using the text in the classroom, like assigning the reading, but then using the visualizations and so forth
Mhm.
in the classroom versus like, you know, standard lecture.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, it was interesting though to hear, it was, what was the name? Jason from Canada. He said that he doesn't lecture much, but yet at the beginning he said he had a whole suite of lectures, you know? So it's that, yeah, just trying to figure out how to best approach that, you know, with students reading the materials prior to class and then using the text in class.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think again, it goes back to what are you actually going to be able to use in class? Because I think
Right.
having students do the end of chapter questions, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
paper, that's like so. What I like to see or what I like to think about is, okay, I've just taught you how to think about as a transgressive sequence. You know, you're going to have a finding upward sequence. Let's go to the visualizations at the end of chapter 3 and look at Gigapan 1. What do you see that allows you to do that? That's where I feel like you could incorporate the text in the course.
Yeah.
But that's where, again, in the text, I feel like kind of what Jason was saying of having sort of the printable PDF. So in chapter 3, you'll have a transgressive sequences when you get a coursing upward section, blah, blah, blah. You have that text there, but then you have this separate resource that's linked in the text that has the whole series of gigapans or stratigraphic column to work off of, that kind of thing.
We have to, I guess, assure, you know, I mean, this would come later, but, you know, the printable version, just the format of that, you know, because if you embed a lot of video and visualization type stuff, how do you basically take that out when you want a print version, you know?
Right.
And do you put all of those visualizations embedded right where they're needed, or do you put them all off to you know, not an appendix, but, you know,
an end of section or list or yeah. That's
I don't know, I really like the Slick textbook. That I really like their format, but it doesn't sound like that's particularly from the data that Jason had, that's really what students want.
I guess here's the way I think about it when I'm thinking about real students I've talked with in the last year. I have because I don't use a text for historical. And so I had several of them comment that they really didn't like that because they want that thing to sort of hang their hat on, that thing to go back to, refer to over and over again. But on the other hand, when they want to do research, they're not going to go to a text. The first thing they're going to do is look up YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it goes. So I don't know that, I think that having a text is key, like he was saying, for international students, for students who are struggling with language and learning the language of geology. I think it's useful to have that in a written form. But yeah, I think that perhaps one of our biggest strengths here is really thinking about the visualization piece. If we are sort of mimicking the Slick text with this very sort of stripped down narrative that we're writing, really focusing on the visualization piece, maybe that's the way to go.
Does seem like there was some interest in having having some stuff off to the side for remedial biology as well. So it doesn't have to be a part of the main narrative, although it was interesting to hear that the disagreement there on that. So we have to think about this a bit more. We've been writing sections, so do we just sort of focus on some big moments in time and not worry so much about going over all the fossil groups?
Well, again, that's where I say doing the faunas is a way to do that.
Yeah.
Because I do agree with that to a certain extent. Does it really matter? You don't need to know what an Edro asteroid is.
Right. I mean, brachiopods and pelecypods feed differently. The different life habits. Interesting, but in the context of the larger ecosystem, what does it mean? That's probably the bigger point at this introductory level.
Right.
And I think, as complex as this topic is, historical, that is why we're seeing so many people all over the map on how they approach it.
Right.
Whether it's upper level, lower level. So, how do we be everything to everybody?
Right. Right. And I don't think we can. And so maybe that's part of it too, is we have to feel like what feels most right to us. And I think what feels right to us is we know that we need a less stodgy text.
Yep.
We need interactives. We need visualizations. And I think that the four of us definitely like this idea of big moments, interaction of spheres, if you will, in the big moments.
Yeah.
And I think if we kind of, maybe we just make a list of that and put it at the top of all of our writing stuff. It's this is our focus, Yeah. Our mission statement, if you will.
Yeah. And I think that is, I think that is the way that, one of them said, the way that historical and really all of geology is going into a Earth system approach. And, they mentioned Stanley's Earth system science or Earth systems history, which is what I use for, in having inherited this historical class that I'm teaching online. That's the text that was chosen, and it's horrible.
Oh, the one he mentioned, you mean?
Yeah, the Stanley text.
Okay.
It is a Earth systems approach, but it's that's what we don't want to do. If we want an Earth system approach, we don't want it to look like that.
Well, when I think of Earth systems analysis and I think of just plain systems analysis, you start getting systems modeling with stocks and flows and quantification of flows and stocks, and even just the IPCC carbon cycle example, where you've got the red lines and then the blue lines, and you can see how many petagrams of carbon are going one way or the other. I mean, I use it for certain tasks, but it can become. There's a nice to have a quantitative element like that, but it's better just to talk about at this lower level, at this introductory level. I think just to focus on the conceptual models.
Right.
But I think if from an old engineering class before I changed my major to geology, you've got the black box, you've got your inputs, you've got processing, you've got outputs. So if we think about these case study major, here are the inputs coming in from the different systems. Here's what's happening with life, here's what's happening with the spirit, etc. Then they interact in this way. Here's the end result. I think that's kind of what we want to emphasize.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of like what Pam was saying about how, you think about where the plates are and where the plate affects where the climate is, and then that's going to affect what's going on with sea level. So it's that whole
Right.
too. And I think that is also something students can, at an introductory level, you kind of lead them through that feedback loop that starts to be created.
Right. Well, and that is, what is some of that basic terminology we want to make sure that we talk about then? Do we want to talk about stocks and flows and feedback, positive, negative feedbacks? I think we're going to have to talk about some of that. And then keep reusing those terms as we go through the book so that they become part of their common parlance on some level. And that would help with the current discussion of climate change that they hear about. What is it about albedo changes at the poles that make them a positive feedback? What is it to be additive to the already existing problem of
Right.
as a positive feedback? Maybe there's some value in that without getting bogged down in it too much. But
to me, that's kind of like, that is the way we would do the treatment of time. Instead of the march through time. Like, we're still going to need basic content of, here's how you look at a rock and interpret things about it.
yeah,
And so there's that. And I think that's different than just a physical treatment of, here are sediments, here are ways we look at environments. I think there's like a deeper kind of story that's in the rock that you're telling historical.
you mentioned that, and that Callan likes to use this phrase, learning to speak rock.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a funny phrase in a way, but it's kind of down to earth. And I just used it with my mother-in-law the other day. We're baling hay. We're coming out of the field. I'm just riding with her in the RTV. And she was looking for a rock she'd seen in the field and couldn't find it. And I said, you'd think after all this education, all this time learning to speak rock, you'd think I'd be able to, it would just call out to me and I'd hear it, just joking around. And she chuckled at that, but she understood that. She has no background. And I thought, just as you were talking, Karen, like, an introductory section on how to speak rock would be a really cool way of approaching it. And then you get into these big events where they have through time where we learn about them through the rock record. And we are, again, applying those skills of speaking rock for snowball earth. And how do we understand what the rocks are telling us when we look at, I don't know. That might be an interesting way of structuring it.
No, I think that's what we want to do. I feel like we've had this conversation already almost.
Yeah.
Well,
but we do need to keep circling back, and I still don't, I don't think we're at a place yet where we still understand how we're going to structure this and how it's going. We don't have an end vision yet.
Well, let's get through tomorrow's webinar and then reconvene with Callan. I'm gonna see where this video is and try to share with him a link, although he may just be able to log in. I may just say, hey, log into the Sage account. It should be there. But I know we all probably have to go and get some other things done. So I know I do. So let's all sleep on this and come back tomorrow and run another one.
Get more different feedback.
We'll send out the same link. So we'll just use the one that I reshared today, and hopefully that one was actually labeled
Yeah.
for tomorrow. So glad it worked.
Yeah,
Hopefully there weren't other people trying to get into another room that was empty.
yeah,
But
yeah,
All
no, I
right.
think this went well. So
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, food for thought.
yep,
Thank you all.
yep.
Okay.
Thank you. See you
Have a
tomorrow.
good day. See you
See you
tomorrow.
tomorrow.
Bye-bye.